Oh, they are new.
They are. They're just the next iteration of the one I previously had, which had support for analog and using the analog output. So I'm going old school.
You missed me dancing. I could tell that you were doing multitasking there.
Yeah. I was just making sure that the two meeting invites were the same link. Which they are. I realized I left that part out. Yeah.
What? That can't be true. Oh, it does say.
Interesting. It also at the same time says this call is open to anyone. Just to test real quick, I'm going to try and join from my other Google account.
Oh, she's in.
Thank you. Yes, I made it. Here I am. The link that I got via email calendar invitation, it keeps telling me that this meeting is open only to people that were invited. So I don't know exactly why, but the last one in the Slack worked. It took me a little bit of time to get to the Slack and ping you both. So it's only us here?
Yes.
Best people, right?
Yes, absolutely. At least now.
Yes. I saw that Brad said that he's at the hackathon today.
Yep. That's his way of getting out of homework that he had from last time. So.
I know, but that's okay. Many years back, I had a rule: whoever was missing a meeting would get all the homework.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure he's aware of that.
Correct. What can we do? Let's roll sleeves. Let's do a lot of things.
So Jen has been adding to the meeting notes.
Put them in the chat.
Okay, let me get them. I know.
And we had been talking about,
Did I tell you lately, both of you and all the others, how much I love working with you? No, I didn't, but I do. So I'm going to use this opportunity to say it again while I'm filling things in here. It says August 22nd. That's today, right?
Mhm, yeah.
Already August 22nd.
I know, my
Yeah.
daughter's first day of school this year.
Wow. So now you are free during the day.
Yeah, I guess. She's pretty independent.
So what should I add here? Attendees, me.
Mhm.
Can I? I cannot edit. I can see I cannot edit.
Hmm.
I need to sign in. That's why it doesn't let me sign in. Okay. I wonder if that was not the reason for the browser not letting me in, because I was not signed in the browser with my Nesta email.
It might be, Jay, because I just took a look at the permissions and it says anyone with the link only has viewer access.
Oh, you're talking about with the doc, right, Jen?
Yes, with the doc.
Right. Yep.
Nope. Give it a sec.
It disappeared and it said server error. So now I'm back.
There we go. Let's see. So last time we were discussing the possibility of using cloud events for exchange of OSCAL documents in particular contexts. And the homework had been to go get familiar with cloud events because we only each had like a rough idea of what they were.
May I ask a dumb question?
Mhm.
That cloud events, are those conferences or other kind of cloud event? Other kind of events, not this kind of events, not gatherings.
Mhm. I think maybe hopefully this is not too much of a simplification, but it's like talking about like a REST API, but removing the context of REST. So it's just like these. Here's a you can ask for a document, and like these are the things that you could put in your request for a document, or you can give a document, and this is what in either case, like there's structure around what the parameters and what the documents need to look like, and then you can apply that. Yeah, it's transport agnostic. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was much simpler.
So Easy Dynamics worked for quite some time on a REST API.
Mhm.
And they were hoping that the community will look into and say, if that's good or not. And the idea was being able to go into a repository and request only a fragment of the artifact,
Mhm.
update it, and then push that update back, not get the entire document. We had long ago an issue, even before we released OSCAL, and said, yeah, well, it's good to have those documents. They're going to be humongous. We'll need to define a protocol for being able to update those, exchange information as fragments. Now, where it's become critical, because I've been thinking of that even now after the FedRAMP meeting, when they were saying they wanted to focus on integrating or developing a new OSCAL model that allow the scanners to generate OSCAL that can be validated before it becomes part of another model. Sort of think of the assessment results and you have their observations. Well, if somebody's pushing those fragments to you, how do you know that they're validated before they're pushed? And there is no mechanism for validation of fragments of OSCAL because you need the entire schema. Would that be created as a sub-module or be another module that becomes part of the larger module? And so you validate them, then that small fragment as a separate artifact that has a schema to validate. It's still something that it could be very interesting to discuss with this community to bring it to FedRAMP because they're looking into that, bring it to the community as well, because that was raised during the FedRAMP meeting because they have large data sets there. And if FedRAMP is coming with something, it's going to be proprietary, and then all tools will have to adopt it. Is it the best, or can that be done with a larger eye, with more eyes on it? And
Yep.
that's the time for them to do so because they are pushed very hard to have that infrastructure ready and the support. And they are looking into that. So I think that that's a very good and interesting topic to tackle, aligned with the concept of the API.
By the way, I had invited Brian. He was out on vacation, so he's just getting, I think,
Which
caught
Brian? Brian Ruff?
up.
Brian
From Easy Dynamics.
Easy Dynamics, Brian Ruff. Yeah. He was today in the FedRAMP meeting just right now. He might have called into the FedRAMP meeting even from his vacation because it's way too important. But even FedRAMP, Walter Meyer expressed interest in the CNCF work because they are dealing with cloud, right? And I provided the information. I don't know if he is going to have the time. He wants to be everywhere, but he might not have the time either. So.
Jen, what do you think if we showed Michaela your Miro?
Yeah, we could do that. And then I thought we could talk about how cloud events or something similar to cloud events might apply there for the certain places.
Where the community today during the FedRAMP meeting had a long conversation. They're saying, hey, OSCAL has the models from the top down, but the scanners are scanning all the time. So when they find something they need to report, where am I going to report? What way bringing it to align with that process, not only updating the information. And OSCAL allows you to create assessments of subsets of the system, of a subset of controls, just one component. Say this time for this system, I'm only assessing this. Well, if the scanner is finding something from the bottom up, then how do you trigger that to come to you from the top down as well to generate only for that? Or do you add to something that is waiting there as an artifact? So that's another area of best practices of how do you use that? How do you generate? Because you can have a lot of assessment plans and assessment results for the same system.
I'm so glad you brought that up because it's something I've been thinking about recently too. Essentially, like having your SSP be an aggregation of all your components and all of the validations or rules that you might want to apply. And then that would act as the trigger, like maybe changes or periodic changes would act as the trigger for the scanner. And then the assessment plan is just a filter on top of that. And you already have your evidence and your results waiting for you. So you would say, oh, I want to look at this right now. I want to look at this component, these controls right
If you
now.
think of the system, a security plan, you can have multiple triggers to that, right? You can have controls-based triggers because controls updates to the system triggers. But then in the risk management process where you plan of how to assess something and maybe your scanner is doing every day a scanning or every week a scanning, if you have artifacts aligned with that, is there a way in a platform, GRC platform, to just generate those on the fly? Or maybe the scanner did not find anything today, did not find anything tomorrow, but it finds on the third day of the week something. So how is going to bring that information? Is it going to stay waiting on an assessment plan that says scan daily and didn't find anything? It's going to generate, because too much information can be overwhelming as well. So to make that a useful process and approach. Implementation, system security plan is where everything gets reported to because the system owner needs to take actions, right? But in terms of the assessment, is not always the system owner that is responsible for that because you want to have independent things. And using those artifacts in a dynamic way is something that might be interesting to look into and see how to handle those. Automatically, a tool can say, every day I'm going to generate an assessment plan because I have it as a template, right? And I generate it. But if I don't have any findings, why would I bother somebody? So how can I do that to bring that trigger? So those are aligned with best practices of using something that OSCAL provides to you today.
Right. And so this is what you're talking about, the fragments, right? So if we defined this is a scanner result, this is what it would look like when it's generated into an observation, and then the status in the observation might be that flag, be like, oh, this failed. You need to look at this rule or validation.
Right. And then there's the concept that you have poems, that are carried, and then you have items there. So how are those used? Because when we created the models, we had only FedRAM and the way the legacy approach and the way they were doing and some vision. But is that best? Do we need to do something else? FedRAM is today focusing on pilot on the SSP, but can we be ahead of them by thinking a little bit of that process too? So we don't become followers of what FedRAM is doing. We become the driving or the proposal an approach to that is convenient, because this alignment with DevSecOps processes is something that it's very important and very interesting. And depending on where in that cycle you are putting, because with the DevSecOps, you have components of a system that are waiting there and can be pre-assessed, but then they become part of a system that then is when you are doing that continuous monitoring, the continuous assessment, and how do we use the abilities that OSCAL provide to you to do what you want to do.
Jay, did you want me to share my screen with that Miro? Because I actually think it ties into what we just said.
Yes.
There's one place I want to bring up, Michaela, because I think you might think this is interesting because it ties into something you were just mentioning. We were looking at the assessment results specifically around the attestation piece of it, and wondering if this is something we borrow from the secure supply chain domain? Do we use maybe in toto attestations and store those in a transparency ledger instead of putting them directly into OSCAL? Maybe it was a link, perhaps. So that was just one area that we were talking about, but I can go through the whole narrow.
Interesting that you bring that, because a pilot that I have at NIST is actually focusing on using OSCAL to continue authorized members that are part of a network, a blockchain network, and how to do that, and how that blockchain will actually have two private channels, one for the business, whatever business that is, and the other one is that the ATO channel. But the ATO channel cannot gather all the information because there are security risks in there. If you put into that blockchain the entire information of your assessment. And I can get back to that. So we're looking at providing an attestation that attests to the fact that you did what you're supposed to do and you are in good security posture. So now bringing for the assessment, blockchain is like blockchain assessment and then blockchain ledger for assessment. That blockchain will also have to be authorized using. So it's a chicken and an egg, a little bit of a problem. But I know that on the Department of Energy, there is a similar approach that they were taking for the assessment using a ledger where they were storing that, because they want to make sure that different entities that were responsible for reporting are not going to come back and change those things. But that was used internally for their, that was NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, that did that. So when you're using blockchain internally for yourself, you don't really, it's a system, you are managing it, that's fine. So it was okay from the FISMA perspective. But it's a very interesting approach. One thing that we are faced also with the Hyperledger fabric, in particular with the one that is implemented by AWS, it's limiting the size of the block. So we're not able to put a lot of information on the blockchain because of that. Because assessments produce a lot of information. That's why we went, it was the second reason for going towards the attestation concept. But the first reason, when the team was trying to dump information in multiple blocks, to take an entire OSCAL artifact and break it into multiple blocks, put it on the chain, I said, that's not good. And let me tell you why it's not good. Because if that is open to multiple agencies, multiple entities, then they can claim that they want to use the service, get automatically access to the ATOs because they all have to assess each other and all the data. And after that, they don't go further with any assessment. They leave with their data. And now they have copies of everything of the way you are securing your system. And that's a problem.
Yeah. What about if it was used just for evidence, for the relevant evidence? What do you think about?
How much an evidence can expose information and to whom? I mean, it depends on who are those members.
Yeah.
On the ledger. That's something I need to think, because if I know exactly, and it's not even the legal entity, it's the insider threats that could be. So it's good from the immutability point of view. It's bad from the exposure, because you allow all the others to have copies of your information. So are they entitled today? How do you know that you can continue to trust them every day and nothing happens?
I'm glad I brought this up. That's a lot of good information.
Yeah. Now what you can do, and there's another aspect to this, actually too. You can keep the information separate, all the evidence, and put on the chain, on the ledger, just some form of attestation about that evidence. So if there is an audit, you know where to go and where to find the information without allowing them to change. I had a project in the past with my students in which could be used in this case too. That was a privacy preserving verification of the information on a chain, in which you can give a criteria and verify how those blocks are linked. So you can extract only a subset of the blocks and verify that they are a chain still. And there is a process that can be implemented. But this is also important. So you can have information on the chain, on the ledger, about the evidence, but not the evidence itself.
Yeah, and there's actually an in toto link type of attestation. I think that might be like similar to what you're talking about, where you make a statement, like you said, about the evidence, and then you link to the evidence, and then that's where the access control is.
Right.
Yeah.
Because then you reduce the attack vector to just, if you put a hash, for example, they're just a hash collision if they want to change something. It's doable. It's still doable, but they have to work harder of changing the evidence to match something when it has the same hash.
Mm-hmm.
I liked what you are thinking.
Yeah, here, let me go through a little bit more of it, and it might be helpful. I think probably a lot of this would align with.
I used Mirror in the past with a team and still have it. So
Yeah, I love it. It makes beautiful pictures.
yeah. But then they can make very complicated ones. So
That's true. Yeah, that's why we have some links here. Just to keep, so the purpose of, like, say, these pieces are to keep it tool agnostic. And then we can explore that a little bit down below, or that might be something that's explored later by the group. But this just kind of documents the overall flow. And some of the things that I want to talk about here, because I would like your perspective, are the purpose of validation components and how they could be used. Because here we kind of follow the typical flow where we have the catalog author, and they produce the catalog and possibly some baselines, and that's consumed by the component suppliers in this case. But when we get to validation, could that be a policy engine provider, or an evaluation tool provider, saying, I can validate this is met by this automation, essentially?
So the component definitions coming from the vendors can be tailored to create component definitions that are playbooks that organizations at the policy level decide of how those components can be implemented by an organization. So you can have here like two layers. One is vendors, and then it can go to organization that they can cherry pick from what vendor is producing, tailor them, and apply them as policies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the question that I had for the community in the past too was, if I do that, component definition can be used if the organization uses those as playbooks. But if you are trying to provide guidance of how to, at the policy level, the component definition needs to have a dedicated model that when it becomes part of the system implementation layer, you can put it into your system and say, policy 1, you must implement XYZ this way. Then when you implement it, you can check against that and report. But if you would use the data structure of a component definition and you drop it into a system security plan, that it satisfies your control. It's not telling you how to satisfy the control. It's a nuance. The data structure could be the same, but can be misinterpreted by a GRC tool. And I raised that several times with the community. If there is a need of a policy model that is very well aligned with the component definition model, allowing you to say how to do things, but can be used by GRC tools to check against. Even if it says, if it's a playbook and it says, this is how you have to implement it. If I use it as a policy, then I can check against it. If I use it as a component definition, then it populates my SSP saying, this is how I'm already doing it.
Right. And I think that might be similar, correct me if I'm wrong, it might be similar to the rules model that's been played around with, meaning the rule might say, this is how this particular technology satisfies this control. And it's granular enough that someone could say, okay, this is how I check it in the technology.
Right. So you can go that route. It's kind of blurring the line a little bit, because the policy as code, as Anka is elaborating, is basically information for each component that implements a control, right? It's like part of the SSP. Now, in a component definition, you revert a little bit. You have component and then set of controls, not control in a bunch of components.
Mhm.
But the information is pretty much similar. We're looking at the data that we want to convey to the user, and what is the model that allows a tool to operate on that data to know what to do with it. The data can be similar information in different models, but how, based on the type of the model, can be interpreted properly, correctly by the GRC tool without a human putting an additional, effort or information in there.
So do you mean like the expression itself, perhaps? Like a
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think of an example, and it's not coming very fast. In a component definition, if I take MongoDB, let's say, as a
Mhm.
component definition from the vendor, it can tell me that implements TLS, and user needs to generate the keys, right? If I have system security plan, if I have a system and I want a MongoDB in there, I can take this component definition and dump it in there, right? And
Mhm.
it populates my system security plan. GRC knows how to do with that because it's implementation information in there. And we'll arrange the information, whatever it fits in the system security plan. If I have a policy that says for every database that your system has, the communication has to be encrypted, right? As more policy. And then I need to come and say exactly what is my database and am I doing that correctly or not. So I need to have a different place I can drag into my system security plan as a component of policy, as we are saying today. But that policy is going to be something that is not implementing controls for my system. It's something that I can check against it, that I implemented it correctly.
Mhm.
And it's a little bit, I remember that I had conversational length with Anka on this. In 853, all -1s are policy controls.
Mhm.
It's a control because it tells you to document something, to generate something, to generate that policy. Now, you can have that policy and all the other controls might be totally disjoint from your policy. And the fact that you just check on the control that is implemented, it means you have a document. The majority of the assessments doesn't connect the content of the policy with the controls that are supposed to satisfy that policy. You could, but it depends on how accurate and how deep you want to go with that assessment. Anka was saying, no, I'm only checking the fact that there is there. Then the human needs to make sure that the rest is connected, because it's being in formats that are not standardized. I cannot automate that. And I see the point, but then saying that you have the AC1 implemented because there is a document there without going inside the document and see that AC2 and AC3 and all the others are aligned with the policy won't be sufficient. Somebody needs to do that. And then you pull in the manual part of the assessment to ensure that that is done. The auditor is the one that has to do that. But we do need to basically automate it. It would be nice to automate it, right? But there is not a format for that AC1 policy that everyone is using. So
I wonder if even a stepping.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, to check against it. And this is where some people are using NLP to do that.
And I wonder if even a stepping stone is to check the document metadata. For example, if a document needs to be updated or reviewed at a specific frequency, to check that sort of information but
even that is tricky, because let's say that you have to review the document every 3 months. It doesn't tell you exactly that when you review that, you open it. So what are you going to check? Are you going to check the last modified, which is the time when somebody opened it? Or are you going to check that it has been reviewed and but maybe there is no change in there? So enforcing to have a new signature, right? When the review is done. So that's procedural.
Yeah.
An organization can do better or can be lazy. But there are ways to move forward. So with putting more automation and those sort of things that I discussed with many, well, the control tells you that the policy needs to be reviewed every 3 months. Well, depending on you do that, well, if you're enforcing procedurally that it has to be signed anytime somebody opens and reviews it, then you check on the signature, the date of the signature and so on. And then you know for sure that person X that was assigned to do so really did that. Because otherwise they might just open it or not open it or not do anything. So I don't know. How can you check to ensure that that's accurate? If you don't have all the checkpoints in place, you won't be able to do a check on that. Correct.
Right.
I think that's, Jen, if you scroll over to the to the right where the control assessors. And so and then you have the assessment plans, and a little bit down further are well, there's only one example there now in that box, but so like how you had talked about like how often, like the freshness date, like this needs to be reviewed however often. And if they're signing in the ledger, hey, I looked at that, I did the review, nothing needed to be, but they did what they needed to do, and they're a trusted, they're a trusted entity, then that can be part of the automation. That's what you're saying, Michaela? Like that?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
And there is a plan that you can do. You can say, I'm planning to assess all policies every 3 months, right? Can be one plan. I'm planning to assess the other controls every month. I'm planning to assess this group of controls every day. And then I have scanning, right? Well, how scanners can find, and it's not predictive things, whenever things happen, could be multiple times a day. How do we capture what scanners are finding to trigger this? not from the top down, but also from the bottom up. I have something. So is there a template because the scanner found something is generating? Because I can think in GitHub, for example, that scanners are going to dump something, a fragment. And then I can have actions that get that fragment, put it in my template that I created upfront to create a complete object, artifact, OSCAL artifact. I can assess that, I can validate that is valid, and dump it in there. And once it's generating, again, there's another action or a pull request because there's a new file. So if I'm building that on GitHub, I can come with all sorts of automation, innovative, but it's use case specific, right? Depending on what you use for that as a platform.
Jen, if you go back to the policy as code engineer.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I think what we were wondering here is, what if the scanner, the people doing this, the tooling there, what if they tie up front, they tie a, we're scanning for this particular, like the timeout for a idle session, the value for that. And they tie that to a particular component definition, or, so if they proactively tie it to OSCAL, what OSCAL structure should they tie it to? How should they, all that? I think that's kind of
but that will be definitely tied into control by component.
Mm-hmm.
or statement control, a requirement statement by component, where you check on the session timeout. There is a control. I don't remember the number right now. And each component can have different timeouts, right? And ways of checking for those. And those get scanned. Well, if somebody changes one day that configuration and is detected that got changed, it needs to be reported, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you trigger that deficiency? Because you found them, you have an observation, a finding right away. And there is a model in assessment results where we put that, and there is a poem that allows you to convey that finding and observation back to the system owner to address it, to fix it. But my way today, without any tool of doing that on my blockchain project, would be, hey, the scanner found something, scanner dumps information in GitHub for me. I'm collecting as evidence. The moment it dumps something in there, I'm taking with a script, I'm converting it in a fragment of OSCAL, plug it into using, OSCAL libraries or something, or Python code into my right model, and generate an assessment results with those. And then poem align with it. Or I'm dumping it, or I can dump in an existing assessment results that stays open there and update that one. And because I'm updating the assessment results, that is an artifact that I'm keeping live all the time in my GitHub repository, then a poem is generated because something was found. So depending on how you want to do that, OSCAL allows you to do that. I can create a new assessment results, a small one just for this, or I can update an existing one and just generate poems. OSCAL is not prescriptive, it's procedural, right? How do you want to implement it? What is your tool? What is your approach? How do you want to handle your own data?
I think that actually, the workflow you just described might be an interesting use case and bring us back to cloud events and the use of it, because it could be kind of what you said is the source action in cloud event terms is the scanning result, or the fact that a result was scanned. If there's a compliance impact, then we generate an OSCAL fragment, and then we aggregate, and then
At the moment that fragment exists somewhere, it gets, triggers an action or something. It brings back either by updating an artifact, and once that it's updated, gets committed, right? And there is a new process that needs to be initiated with a poem to be generated that it's sent to the system owner, which is another actor that needs to act on that. So
Yep.
it
Exactly.
has a particular amount of time to act on that. And those are things that we're doing with our blockchains. And hey, you have a week to address those. If not, we start voting and you're voted out. So
Yep. And then you could have multiple consumers, like you were saying. So one is there a compliance event? And then that starts a chain. And the other one is, do I want to do automated remediation? And so that could play in as well.
mhm. Right.
We are at time. This has been really helpful for sure.
Thank you.
Would love to hear out-of-band feedback on the diagram as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And if I can get access to it, I'll dive deeper into it and try to provide a feedback. Right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. My pleasure.
We like working with you too, Michaela.
Yes, absolutely. Now I have tons to think about. I'm so excited.
Well,
All right.
It's a
until
pleasure.
next time.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care.